Our guest today is Michael Pack. Michael Pack is the president and CEO of Palladium Pictures, LLC, an independent film company he launched in 2023 with his wife, executive producer Gina Capo Pack. Palladium focuses on high-quality documentaries that reclaim cultural narratives through compelling storytelling with three main pillars: long-form feature documentaries, short-form documentary series, and a film incubator program to train the next generation of fair-minded documentarians. He is also the producer and director of the Lockdown Dissidents, the latest addition to WSJ Opinion Docs, a series of documentary films produced by a collaboration between the Wall Street Journal Opinion and Palladium Pictures. Michael Pack, welcome to the Bruce Collins Show.
It's good to be on with you.
It's great to have you on. Now, can you tell us first about Palladium Pictures and what is its mission?
Yes. Well, Palladium Pictures is the second film company that I founded with my wife. We started with Manifold Productions, and between the two of them, we've been producing documentaries for many decades. I've done over 15 documentaries that have been nationally broadcast on PBS. The last one or two were about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, called Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words, and one on the war in Iraq. But Palladium Pictures is really designed to expand that footprint, to sort of bring the next generation of documentary filmmakers that are fair-minded or right-of-center or libertarian, bring them up to speed and to increase our output. And so you mentioned, Bruce, in your introduction, we have this incubator where we train these filmmakers. We have 4 or 5 of them each year go through our program. We fully fund and support them while they make a short documentary. So the first 8 of them are out, and they're available and free on Real Clear Politics. And we have 4 in process now. And any of your listeners or viewers should apply. They can go to palladiumpictures.com and apply if they are a filmmaker or know a filmmaker. But beyond that, we want to reach new audiences and more people and increase our output through the incubator process and others. And that's why, in addition to continuing to make long-form films, we launched this project with the Wall Street Journal Opinion section to do a series of short docs about issues and events from the recent past that have been misreported, memory holed, or just forgotten. And the one that you mentioned, Lockdown Dissidents, which is just out, is our third. And they're all available for free on the Wall Street Journal site or palladiumpictures.com. You can navigate to it through there. But the easiest is to go to their WSJ.com, their YouTube page, or even the dedicated page for those documentaries, which is WSJ.com/opinion docs. They're all about 30 minutes, and they deal with these recent current events. And as you said earlier, the last one is about the lockdowns.
Mm-hmm. I interviewed a few weeks back Hannah Pewter, who has an excellent documentary called Operation Arnon, which is also Palladium Pictures. Now, I want to get to your film, The Lockdown Dissidents, but before we do, I do also want to highlight some things that have gone on with Michael Pack. President Bush nominated you to serve on the National Council on the Humanities, and also President Trump as CEO of the U.S. Agency for Global Media. It was a short run because Joe Biden became president, and he had you resign at his request. But how did you get so connected in Washington, D.C.?
Well, I've been here a long time. I mean, I'm originally from New York City, and we were in Los Angeles for a while, but I've been here, over 30 years, and I make documentaries about politics and issues, and I have lots of friends in government, in think tanks, in journalism. And so, originally, I actually came to Washington when George H.W. Bush appointed me to run what is now the TV part of the Voice of America. And look, it's the reason we formed Palladium Pictures is there are just not enough right of center, libertarian, conservative filmmakers. The medium is dominated by the left. So poor President Bush had few to choose from if he wanted a filmmaker to run this division. So I was sort of the inevitable choice. I had already done a bunch of films for PBS, and I was a award-winning documentary filmmaker and sympathetic to him, and there were not many others he could choose from. So he was sort of stuck with me, and that goes for his son, W, who pointed me, as you say, on the National Endowment for the Humanities Council. They wanted a filmmaker too. They do a huge amount of support and grants for films and filmmakers. And so similarly for President Trump, I had experience in international broadcasting. They needed somebody, and they asked me to serve. They asked me to serve right away. It was March after that, 2 months after he was sworn in, and it took me 3 years and 3 months to get confirmed by the Senate. They did not like me, unlike President Trump. So you're right, I was only there for about 8 months.
Now, as we said before, your latest documentary is The Lockdown Dissidents. One of the central characters in this documentary is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. Can you tell us about his role in this documentary?
Absolutely. But first, I wanted to say one more thing. You mentioned Hannah. Hannah Pewter is a good example of someone who went through our incubator program and made a great film.
Yes.
And it's a good model for what others can do too if they wish to apply. Well, Jay, he is in a way the central figure of the documentary. I mean, he's now the head of the NIH, but at the time of the lockdowns, he was a Stanford professor. And as you know, the lockdowns began at the end of 2019 in Wuhan, China, and based on their extremely austere totalitarian lockdown, the WHO declared that to be the model, and the whole world started to lock down. And so Jay put that to the test starting in March. He did a study to see what were really the effects of COVID-19, and he found what we now know for certain, but it was he found it through the seropositivity study in Santa Clara County by experimentation, that the COVID disproportionately affected older people. Younger people were virtually unharmed by it. And so the lockdowns were not the right way to go. It made more sense to just focus, what he called focus protection, focus your attentions on the people at risk, older people, and let young people go about their lives, and certainly reopen schools. And that was apparent in March. And then the film looks at how those ideas were suppressed. First, the struggles of Scott Atlas and in the COVID task force in the White House. And then, when it was finally suppressed by the government going to social media companies telling them to suppress those views. So it's an interesting story. And it's not just it's the loss of their free speech, but the cost of it was to us. I mean, the lockdowns are among the biggest things that happened to America, maybe the world, in the last couple of decades. Most people would want to forget it and move on, an understandable impulse, but we make documentaries. We think you should learn from the past. So we try to tell the story, what happened and what its cost was. I mean, people are bearing the cost today, not just in students that have lost years of schooling, but young people that are off track and increased suicide, and people who didn't get their medical attention they needed, and people who were unable to visit their ailing parents or dying parents, and the loss of businesses and that'll never reopen. And I mean, a devastating consequences that we're still living through and will in the future.
Can you paint a picture of the initial hours of the COVID spread and China's approach to containing it? And how did that influence other countries?
So it emerged in Wuhan, as everyone knows, and then the images of the lockdown in Wuhan are really astounding. They're in our film. I mean, people were their doors were welded shut. I mean, people were picked up off the street and sent to, detention camps. I mean, only a communist country, a totalitarian country could lock down like that. And no one had ever responded that way to a pandemic before. The WHO went there, declared it a huge success, and then it became a model right away when COVID began to spread, first to Italy and then in the United States. And this was an approach to pandemics that was completely novel. The approach that Jay and others recommended of focus protection was what was the standard for hundreds of years. And so the world engaged in this great experiment, based on the example of Wuhan, and it became a model, and it was a devastating model. And we continued to do it when the counter evidence was there. And our government scientists, Dr. Fauci, Deborah Birx, and others, were able to institute a program that was, without, they're able to assert that their approach was unquestionably the right approach in spite of the evidence. And we all went along with it. In the film, as you know, Scott Atlas talks about how we all gave up our rights when the government asked us to do that. Not just free speech that Jay and Scott Atlas and others had their free speech rights abridged, but freedom to assembly, we couldn't go out and protest unless it was for BLM. And freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Churches were asked to close, and they did. We gave up our fundamental unalienable rights. This is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration that declared those unalienable rights that come from God, not the government. Government can't take them away. But when government asked for them, we did let them take it away, and we shouldn't let that happen again in America.
Yeah. Now, January 31st, 2020, President Trump creates the coronavirus task force. Fauci jumps in as the lead public health person, very high profile. I remember liberals putting memes on Facebook of Fauci as a saint. And he was highly respected by the left in social media and in the mainstream media. Why did he take that position?
Well, in the film, Robert Redfield tells the story that in an early coronavirus task force meeting, the president spoke, and maybe Alex Azar, head of HHS, spoke, and he spoke, and Fauci spoke, and Fauci said, "I'm the expert, come to me." And Redfield said to him, "What do you mean you're the expert? I'm the head of the CDC. You run a lab, just a lab at NIH. There are like dozens and dozens of labs at NIH." But he assumed that power, and he simply amassed it. And Deborah Birx, who was a student of his, went along. She was the official head of the task force. And I mean, it's a case in point for what happens when you let career bureaucrats run things. He had been there for 40 years. He was the highest paid civil servant, I believe, in the government, or among the highest. But more importantly, over 40 years, he had really dug in. He developed a power base. He had his people throughout, not just the NIH, but throughout the CDC and other agencies. And he had developed strong relationships on the Hill and with the media. And he assumed that power, and he got it. I think that President Trump would not let him get away with it this time along if something like that happened. And surely RFK Jr. wouldn't let a subordinate of his assume that kind of power. But Fauci pulled that off to all of our detriment. But I think that you're right, Bruce, that people celebrate him at the time, and many still do. I live in Chevy Chase, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C., a very blue area. We had plenty of "Thank you, Dr. Fauci" signs on the lawns around here. And I believe most of my neighbors still think he's a hero, that he had to struggle against that ignoramus Trump and finally got these great ideas, the great approach out, he and Dr. Birx. And they both wrote books celebrating their approach to COVID. And I think that it's time for the truth to come out and people to sort of understand what happened.
And the truth is found in your documentary, The Lockdown Dissidents. Why do you suppose that alternatives to lockdowns were opposed by leftists and Fauci?
Well, I think that the leftists are always enamored of the government solution to things, big government. I mean, they found the Wuhan solution appealing. And they, I think, were intoxicated. Fauci and Birx, I think, were intoxicated by the power that they had. I mean, as you said, I was in the first Trump administration during COVID, actually. And I could see that people, if you let these career bureaucrats stay, they have power. They want to hold on to power. At one point, Scott Atlas says that in an early meeting with Tony Fauci, he said, "The problem really is the public is not afraid enough. We need to make the public more afraid so they will listen to us." And as Scott Atlas says, that is not really the right way to do public policy or public health policy.
Yeah.
But I think it's very intoxicating to have that kind of power. And I just clung to their views. And if you're in a bubble like they are, and everyone says how great you are, it's easy to think of to hold on to your views. But on a kind of to be even fairer to them, there's really a tendency among scientists to hold on to the orthodoxy. That's why there needs to be debate in science. I mean, look at the classic example of, Copernicus and Galileo. The old view that the Earth the sun went around the Earth was hard for people to give up, even after many years of evidence. People cling to the old ideas for lots of reasons. That's why there needs.
Now, as your excellent documentary points out, Dr. Bhattacharya was being attacked by the likes of Fauci. And at that time, he was doing blood studies in Santa Clara, California, which around April of 2020, which at that time I was living one city over in Sunnyvale. What was Dr. Bhattacharya, though, finding?
Well, he was, he wanted to say, this was early in COVID, this, as you say, March, April. So it was 2 or 3 months since it emerged in China. And he wanted to see what the real effects were, not just reported cases, but by actually taking blood samples, as you say, and measuring who had COVID. He found that there were a huge number of people who had COVID but were asymptomatic, huge number. So that's why lockdowns at a fundamental level don't make sense. If there are a huge number of asymptomatic people, you'd have to lock everybody down all the time. And contact tracing doesn't make sense either, because those people don't know they have COVID and don't know who they have contact with. At that point, where there are a huge number of asymptomatic people, if lockdowns ever made sense, they don't make sense now. And then, as I said, he found out that the people who were most affected, who were not asymptomatic but had symptoms, were older people. And younger people were hardly at risk at all. I mean, especially school-age children. So this was really important data. As Jay says, he thought, well, everybody's going to go, oh, great, now we don't have to lock the whole world down. This is really great news. He thought he would be celebrated. This would make his career. Everyone would be really happy. And he was shocked that the opposite happened, and the news that information was suppressed and he was attacked.
So your documentary, and as you're saying right now, your documentary paints a really good contrast between Dr. Bhattacharya, who was coming up with solutions or trying to, as opposed to Dr. Fauci, who was stoking fears in the press. Again, I know we stated this before, but why would somebody do that? Who's such a public health figure? Why is he stoking fears?
But I mean, there are a lot of conspiracy theories about Anthony Fauci, and actually, a lot of information is coming out thanks to, thanks to sort of releases of emails and congressional investigations, Rand Paul especially. But I think at some basic level, Anthony Fauci thought that he was saving people's lives. He thought he was unquestionably right, Jay Bhattacharya unquestionably wrong. So by suppressing wrong information, he was saving people's lives. In his mind, I think that's what he was doing.
Interesting. So given that your film is so important and it's a period of time we all lived through that, looking back, you can't even believe we went through that. Do you think leftists and fringe elements in Washington would dare try to shut us down again should another virus arrive?
I think there's a chance that they would. But I think the more important point is, I think government bureaucrats, government agencies tend to seize power and come up with government-driven and austere programs. And it's up to us, the American people, not to give up our rights like we did last time. I think big governments have a tendency to do that and have since the dawn of time. So I think there's that temptation. America, we were founded to check that impulse. This is as I said, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration. We are, a protest against authoritarian regimes, in that case from England. It's set up that we, the people, are both the, government depends on our consent, and we are the protectors of our rights that do not come from government. America is almost unique in having that attitude. because the founders recognized that there's a tendency for government to amass power and trample on the people's rights. So, and I think the creation of this fourth branch of government, this administrative state, the swamp, whatever you want to call it, really even exacerbates that problem, of which Dr. Fauci is a prime example.
I like a lot of things that President Trump has done. I don't agree with everything he's done, but I also have a libertarian streak. This is Ron Paul right here. I think he would have made a great president. Now, Dr. Fauci's ties to the Wuhan lab stem from National Institutes of Health, NIH, and National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID, grants awarded to EcoHealth Alliance, a U.S.-based nonprofit that collaborated with and sub-awarded a portion of its funds to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, WIV, for bat coronavirus. Do you think personally that's compelling evidence to tie Dr. Fauci, the Wuhan lab, and COVID together?
I think so. I mean, as you know, our documentary doesn't deal with the origins of COVID, but I think it is so. That I'm convinced by that data that Dr. Fauci's lab, NIAID, was funding gain-of-function research in Wuhan.
Interesting. Terrible. It's such a bad conspiracy that if you think about all the connections and his prior interest in it, and then what he did with it once it came on the scene, it's just horrific. So I really appreciate the films that and documentaries that you're putting out, and folks like Hannah Pewter. So where can people go to watch this documentary? And also, how can people follow the overall work of Palladium Pictures? And is there a way they can support it?
Absolutely. So Palladium Pictures, you can go to our website, palladiumpictures.com. And anyone who wants to support it should reach out to us. And you can find our films, including the Wall Street Journal films, through our website. Or you could find the Wall Street Journal films directly by going to their website, WSJ.com, or their YouTube page and searching for Lockdown Dissidents. And there is a dedicated page on the Wall Street Journal website where all of our WSJ.com opinion docs can be found, and that's WSJ.com/opinion docs. There are 3 now, and there'll be more coming out in the coming months, so that's a good one to sort of bookmark. So they're all free, but not behind the Wall Street Journal's paywall, and they're all the WSJ docs are about 30 minutes long. We have made, as I say, over 15 longer documentaries that you can find through the Palladium Pictures website on lots of topics from American history, one on George Washington, one on Alexander Hamilton, and also on politics and on recent history.
Excellent. Very great documentaries from Palladium Pictures. You can find out more information at palladiumpictures.com. We've been speaking today with the CEO, Michael Pack. Michael, this has been a great honor. I hope we can have you back again sometime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The next film will be out at the end of August. That'd be great to come back.
Great.